Hey there, and welcome to another episode of the Fluent English Conversations podcast. In every episode, I like to talk about a different subject so that you can practice your listening skills, learn new vocabulary, and improve your English in a nice, relaxed, natural way. Remember to download your transcript from the link in the description, and you can study along with me while I'm speaking. Today, we're going to be talking about swearing. And don't worry, I'm not going to be doing loads of swearing. I wanted to talk about the subject in a general context. And if you don't know, swearing is when you use bad or unacceptable words in conversation. So the F word is a good example, or the C word, which we will get into. Often when children or teenagers learn a new language, the first thing they learn is all of the rude words. They like to learn how to swear, they like to how to say rude things because it's funny, because maybe nobody understands what they're trying to say. Native speakers do swear a lot. Obviously, it depends on the person. For example, I swear quite a bit, whereas my in-laws don't swear at all. So it really depends on who you're speaking to. I think that swearing in another language is a very tricky and delicate subject because, like lots of other cultural things, it's not very easy always to understand exactly what these words mean and how they're used in a very subtle way. You can look at the translation. If you look at the English swear word, it will tell you your native language version, which is absolutely fine. But sometimes there are more subtle nuances. There are certain cases where certain words in one language are considered to be the most offensive, and in other languages they're just another word and it's actually not that important. A good example is in Italian, often the blasphemous curse words, the ones that are related to religion and God, often are considered much more offensive, whereas in England at least, those ones are much lighter. We don't think of them in the same way. So even though there are direct translations between the two languages, because often those swear words come from Latin, they aren't thought about in the same way by people. I do think swearing is something very important to understand, and not just about when there's people insulting each other, but how we use swearing and the different levels of rude words in normal conversation and in general natural interaction. I do think the question here is about what words you need to learn and what words you need to use, because I think this is where the big distinction comes. I would never recommend that a student who is an adult go and learn all of the swear words because they think it sounds fun and that's what they hear people using all the time. Because if you use them incorrectly, you can actually be very offensive, and some people will not be understanding in the fact that you didn't understand exactly what they meant. They will take it as you understood the meaning completely and maybe be very offended, or it could even start a fight or an argument in a very extreme case. So you need to be very, very careful when you're copying even slang, because certain slang can be considered offensive by different people. My advice is, when it comes to swearing, slang, rude words, you want to be able to understand what people are saying. So it's really important to figure out what they actually mean and the general level of offensiveness. There are certain words, for example, when you hurt yourself or you stub your toe, maybe you'll say the F word. And in that context, it's considered quite light. It's like saying damn. It's not really considered a rude word by most people. Understanding them is one thing, and that's actually very, very tricky, and you can look online and there are lots of different definitions, and a lot of this will also come from watching and listening to people using them and noticing what the reaction is. Often you will notice that there are certain words that in some contexts everyone will gasp, like in Harry Potter where someone says Voldemort, they'll be like, oh my god. And then in other contexts, people will just laugh and it's fine. For example, the C word, so C-U-N-T, not to be confused with can't, which is cannot, a difficult pronunciation thing there. That word generally in the UK is considered to probably be the most offensive swear word. However, there are certain contexts where it's used by certain groups of people in an affectionate way. So they would go, oh, you little... And in that case, they're not insulting the other person, and everyone would usually laugh. And I have some friends who use it with me in that way, and I take it as an affectionate term they're using, and they don't mean to be offensive. And the intention behind it there is actually really important. If they were using it and very angry and shouting at me, I would react in a very different way than the way they do use it with me. That doesn't mean that I would always use it. That's just what they choose to do, and I accept that that's the way that they use it. Some people, however, will not accept that that's the way they use it, and they don't like it's used at all. And this is where different personalities and different people will have their own impression of what is considered polite and what is considered rude. That's why I would recommend avoiding using them in the majority of cases, because unless you are 100% confident you know exactly how they're used and what they mean and how people are going to react, it can be quite dangerous. Because if you are in a professional context, as an example, if you use any swear words, that might be considered to be completely inappropriate and could get you in a lot of trouble. However, depending on the professional context you're in, maybe in those contexts actually everyone swears all the time, so it depends on the industry, it depends on the age of the people, it depends on where they come from. If you notice here, it's not very easy for me to say, well, yes, you can say this and you can't say this, because there are so many different factors that are involved, and a lot of it is cultural, personality. For example, there are certain swear words that in the UK, in America, you couldn't use because they would be extremely offended. Whereas in Australia, they would say it maybe even more than we do in the UK. And that's something that you will notice if you listen to British TV or British comedy especially, and Australian comedy, there is a huge amount of swearing. They seem very, very comfortable to use lots and lots of swear words. However, in American comedy or in American TV in general, it's much lighter, and swearing on TV is much more restricted. I think the watershed for swearing in America is like 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. or something like that, whereas in the UK it's actually earlier, and in Australia I don't know if there is, or the limits on swearing is different. I don't know if you know this, but for films there's the age rating, so all of them have, PG or U or 12A or whatever the rating in your particular country might be, and depending on that rating and depending on the country it's in, the rating will allow certain levels of swearing, certain words, and certain phrases to be used. For example, I think in Guardians of the Galaxy 3, that was the first Marvel film that used the F word because the rating allowed them to use one. It didn't allow it universally, they couldn't use it throughout the film, they could use that word once. If they used it twice, that would automatically move it to the next rating level, which obviously they don't want to do because of the audience they're targeting. And these definitions and these ratings are changed on a regular basis. So if you look at films from the 80s, and then you look at films now that are the same rating, the level of violence, of swearing, of blood, of sex, anything like that is very, very different. For example, the old Arnold Schwarzenegger films that I used to love growing up, they were all 18s. Whereas if you watch them now compared to a 15, for example, the 15 now is probably much more violent, there's much more swearing, and it's because over time these ratings will change, certain words will become acceptable, certain words will become unfashionable or unacceptable. This is where keeping up with these particular terms is very, very tricky. And when I'm studying another language, I tend to prefer to avoid that minefield because I don't want to be offensive. If I have very close friends, I'm happy to be a little bit more playful with them and joke about it and maybe use some of the rude phrases that I know, but generally I would avoid it. As an example, when I teach English to my students, there will be situations where I do teach swearing because there are certain phrases that they want to say. Maybe we're having a laugh together and they want to know how they would normally say that in their native language, and I would teach them that. But I'm always very careful to explain that in certain contexts you shouldn't use them, and I'm just teaching them because that's a fun phrase they want to learn. Then I can also teach them the polite version, so if they want to use it, then they can. For example, when you say, I couldn't care less, or I don't care, is generally quite polite. I couldn't care less is just a bit more emphatic, but it's not offensive. Whereas if you say, I couldn't give a sh, or I couldn't give a f, those ones are considered offensive. They are even more emotive, even more emphatic, but they are considered offensive by some people. And that's really the important thing, is even for me as a native speaker, I wouldn't use that particular phrase in some context because I wouldn't want to be offensive. To wrap things up then in this quite delicate, touchy subject, my advice for you would be, like all vocabulary, all phrases, it's really good to learn how to understand these things. And then you have to make the educated decision of which phrases you need to use yourself and which phrases that you should avoid because you don't understand exactly what they mean, how they are used, or how the other person will interpret what you're saying. And this will apply in your own native language as well as English or any other languages that you are learning. So my advice is be careful, have fun in a context where you feel safe with a person that you feel comfortable with. You can experiment, you can play, you can test what the limits are, but understand that in some contexts you might be offending people and that you need to be very careful because you don't want to get yourself into hot water. And we're going to leave this very touchy subject here. And I hope you found this discussion about swearing interesting. You'll notice I haven't really taught you lots of swear words because, as you'll know if you've watched all the way through to this point, I think you need to find those on your own and really take them in slowly and appreciate the value of them. If there are any other subjects you want me to discuss about English, language learning, or British culture in general, put a comment below the video and I will add them to my list. I hope you have a fantastic week, have a great day learning English, and I look forward to speaking to you very soon.